Hello again, if you're just joining us, thank you. I'm waiting just a minute or so before I get started, as Zoom is letting everyone join us. So thank you for your patience. Okay, it looks like everyone's in, so let's go ahead and get started. So thank you for joining this afternoon. This is going to be a webinar about rent increases for CSFRA covered rental units. This is going to be specifically about the CSFRA. We're not going to talk about mobile home rent stabilized units in this webinar. We are planning some in the future, so we'll definitely let our mobile home landlords and property managers know about the upcoming webinars for rent increases regarding the mobile home rent stabilization ordinance. But today we're going to be talking about the CSFRA. And just before we get started, we always like to have a reminder that city staff is not able to offer any legal advice, but we can offer best practices and tips and overviews of city programs. So that's what we'll be doing this afternoon. My name is Andrea Kennedy, and I work for the City of Mountain View in the Rent Stabilization Program. So I'll be giving the webinar this afternoon, and we'll be stopping periodically to ask and answer questions. All right, just a quick summary of how the webinar is going to work this afternoon. I'll be giving the presentation, as I said, and you all can use the Q&A or the chat, or you can even raise your hand to ask questions as we move through the webinar. And I will be moderating the questions and trying to answer your questions, and we'll stop periodically through this afternoon's presentation, as well as at the end of the presentation, we'll have a nice open Q&A session. So for our agenda today, we'll talk about which units are covered by the CSFRA, and then we'll look at what the allowed rent increases for the upcoming years of the 2022, 2023, what the allowed rent increase is for that. We'll go into noticing requirements, and then we'll talk about online registration and submitting your notices. And we'll wrap up with different resources on the website and in person. All right, so let's hop right into it. Again, this webinar today is going to be about units covered under the CSFRA, which is the Community Stabilization and Fair Rent Act. That is our rent stabilization law in Mountain View. Okay, so what is the CSFRA? As some of you might know, it is a voter-approved measure that's meant to stabilize the community by reducing housing turnover in certain types of rental units. And it does that in three main ways. First, which is what we're focusing on today, is stabilizing rent. So there is a rent increase that is set every year by our committee, and that's what we'll be talking about today. Secondly, it provides eviction protections. And thirdly, it is able to ensure a fair rate of return on your property. All right, so who's covered? So in Mountain View, most of our apartment buildings are covered by the CSFRA because most of them were built before it went into effect, which is December 23rd, 2016. There are two different types of covered units. However, we have fully covered rental units and we have partially covered rental units. So when we're looking at our fully covered rental units, these units have to follow both the rent stabilization portion of the law as well as the eviction protections, where our partially covered units only look at the eviction protection part of the law applying to them. All right, so for fully covered units, these would be units that were built before 1995 and are not government or subsidized rental units. And our partially covered units are going to be those built between 1995 and when the law went into effect in December 23rd, 2016. And they also are not government or subsidized rental units. And if anyone ever has any questions about if your unit is covered, just reach out to us and we'll look that up for you. All right, any questions about covered units? I'll just pause quickly to check for hands, or you can type your question in the Q&A or the chat. All right, seeing none, let's go ahead and continue. I do also want to point out our contact information here in the bottom right. So you can go ahead and write that down, and always feel free to give us a call or an email. All right, so next up, we're going to be talking about rent and rent increases. So we'll be going through several different topics regarding rent increases. First, I want to talk about what is rent. So included in the definition of rent in the CSFRA, we are going to look at our base rent. So this means the rent at the initial move-in of the tenant. So that would be their base rent. We also have included in base rent parking fees, pet fees. So any type of fees that you might be charging are going to be included in your base rent. Any utilities that you as the landlord are paying for that are included is part of the rent, as well as like storage fee or any other housing services that are provided and included in the tenant's monthly rent charge. So that's all going to be bundled together and calculated when looking at your base rent. So also included in rent then are any allowable rent increases that we can add on after we know our base rent. So that includes our AGAs, which means annual general adjustment, which is just another way of saying our yearly rent increase that's allowed. The other ways that we can increase rent is by landlord petitions and also banked rent increases. And we'll talk a little bit about those in just a second. So something that's not included in the definition of rent would be deposits. So deposits are not included, and they can also not be increased during a tenancy. So like a security deposit that you put in the beginning of your tenancy or a pet deposit, those things cannot be increased in during the tenant's tenancy, and they also are not included in the definition of rent. Okay, and as we go through, we do have some pauses, but if you think of a question, just go ahead and type it in and we'll get to it during our break. So the next thing we'll talk about is rent increases. So again, we use that word, the annual general adjustment, which we shorten and call it an AGA. So what those are the allowed percentage of rent increase that can be applied to units covered under the CSFRA. We announce these rent increases every June, and they're announced by the Rental Housing Committee. And so once we announce the rent increase for the year, it cannot go into effect until September 1st. So for example, we have our current AGA that was announced, and the first time it can be implemented would be September 1st. As you'll see here. So our 2022-2023 AGA is 5%, and it can go into effect, so you can start implementing that on your tenants starting September 1st, 2022. And it will run through August 31st, 2023, and then we'll have our next year's rent increase. Right? And one thing that's very important to remember when thinking about our rent increases is that you can only increase rent once every 12 months. So if you're doing a September 1 rent increase, you're going to have to wait until 12 months, the next September 1, 2023 to do your next rent increase. So one increase every 12-month period. All right, so now that we've talked about the current AGA, the 5%, let's talk a little bit about past rent increases. So we call those banked rent increases, and those are any AGAs that were not charged in previous years. So I find that a lot of landlords I've talked to recently do have some banked rent increases stored because they weren't giving so many during the COVID pandemic. So you might also find yourself in that situation where you didn't give a rent increase in 2020 or 2021, but now in 2022, you're thinking about giving a rent increase. So those previous increases that you didn't use, we call those banked rent increases. So of course you can use them. However, when you add up your banked rent increases, you can't give more than 10% a rent increase for any given year. So we have a list here of our previous AGAs. So it starts from the top, which was last year, or sort of we're still in this current year because this one goes through August 31st, 2022. And that was 2%. So if you hadn't used that yet, you can think about banking it for this year and adding it to the 5% starting September 1, or you can continue to keep it banked. So if you don't use it, you get to hold on to it, but once you use it, then you lose it. All right, so we can look at last year was 2%, the previous year 2.9%, and then 2019, 2020, 3.5, 3.6, and 3.4% going back to the 2017, 2018 year. So you can sort of keep your records, see which ones you've used, which ones you haven't used. If you're a new property owner, you do not get to keep the banked rent increases for the previous owner. You start fresh on your own and when you purchase the building. So that's always important to remember as well. Okay, so the third way that you can increase a rent besides the current year's rent increase and any banked rent increases is if you file a petition for upward adjustment of rent. So we have specific landlord petitions where you can file it with the city in order to increase rent above what is allowed in the AGAs or in the banked AGAs. And we have different types of petitions. So one of our main petition is the MNOI petition, is what we call it. It's the Maintenance of Net Operating Income petition. And that is to make sure that the landlords have a fair and reasonable rate of return on their rental property. And basically you want to file that when your property is no longer operating at a profitable rate that it was back in 2015. So it's definitely something to look at. And we have staff on hand that specializes in these landlord petitions, and they can help walk you through each step and make sure that you have the correct documentation and make sure that you're filing and filling out each document correctly. Along with that, we have a capital improvement petition. So if you are planning on doing a certain type of capital improvement to your property and it's going to be a large expense, you can look at filing a capital improvement petition in order to raise the rent increase on your tenants higher than what's allowed under the AGA. So again, those are something that are a little bit more involved, and you want to really sit down with staff to review the documents that you're going to need and make sure that you're filling out the paperwork correctly. And I will be sure to give you all of our contact information by the end of this presentation. Okay, so now that we've sort of looked at the 3 ways that you as a landlord or property manager are allowed to increase rent, we also need to mention the tenant hardship petition. Because if you are planning on a banked rent increase or a landlord petition, it is possible that a tenant could file a hardship petition in response. So what a hardship petition is when a tenant receives a rent increase that is more than the AGA, they can claim that that rent increase is creating a hardship, a financial hardship, and they can file a petition for this. But again, as I mentioned, it's important to remember that tenants can only request a hardship on rent increases that exceed the current AGA. So that would be on banked rent increases or landlord petition. No matter what, you as the landlord can't implement the current year's AGA, and the tenant can't file a hardship on that amount. All right, so when can a tenant claim a hardship? So if the tenant's receiving a rent increase, again, larger than the AGA, because they received a landlord petition increase or banked rent increase, and they also would meet certain eligibility criteria, then they can file a hardship petition. And what the criteria is, the first one is looking at tenants who are making 100% of the area median income or less, or they are using 50% of their income towards rent, which means they're rent burdened. And you'll notice at the bottom of the screen here, we have a chart that shows the 120% AMI levels and the 100% AMI levels, and charted out by household size. So that is the chart that we look at when we want to know if a tenant might be eligible to file one of these hardships. So the second criteria here is 120% of the area median income, or if the tenant is, again, spending 50% of their income paid towards rent. So if one of those things are happening and the primary residence, the unit is a primary residence of a person under the age of 18, or they are a primary residence of a person 62 years of age or older, or a primary residence of a disabled person, then they would qualify for a tenant hardship. And I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, please ask questions and I'll try to clarify that. The other way to be able to qualify for a hardship is if there is some sort of other extenuating circumstance happening in the tenant's life where the increase over the current AGA is going to cause a hardship. So in that case, the tenant would need to file the petition, explain in detail what this circumstance may be and how it is causing a hardship. And then one of our hearing officers will review the case and determine if in fact a hardship has been caused. And then depending on how much of a hardship or how less of a hardship it is, they can make a determination if the tenant can afford the increase in rent. All right, so I do see we have a question about that. I'll leave this slide up. All right, first question is asking, can we get a copy of the slides that are being shown for review? Yes, you can definitely get a copy of the slides. After this presentation, we'll send out an email to everyone who's registered with the slides and with the recording. All right, there was another comment about the webinar's topic of rent and rent increases, and how I may be covering a little bit about the tenant part of rent and rent increases, but I did think it was important to cover hardship petition Because as a landlord, if you are planning to give a banked rent increase, or if you're planning to do a landlord petition, it is something to think about. A tenant potentially could file a hardship petition. So I just wanted to cover it so that you had all the information in your knowledge bank when moving forward with the decisions about your property. All right, perfect. So let's go ahead. I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next section. All right, let's talk about noticing requirements, because this is very important for our landlords. So there are certain things when giving a rent increase that you are required to do. So the first thing, which is relatively new, is provide a required information sheet. And this is something that the city has on our website that you can download and just attach it anytime you're giving a new lease or anytime you're giving a rent increase. So you want to be sure to download that. It comes in English, Spanish, and Chinese. So you can download that and attach that to your form. The next thing to be aware of is the general rent increase notice. So for the rent increases, you want to give at least 30-day notice. And again, we want to remember that only one rent increase per 12 months is allowed. And finally, what we want to keep in mind is that for banked rent increases, there is a little bit of additional information that needs to be added. So you do, again, still need to give 30 days notice to the tenant, but you also need to give a copy to the rental housing committee within 7 days of serving the notice to your tenant. So once you serve the notice of the increase, you want to upload a copy online. And we'll go over how to do that in just a second. The other thing with these banked rent increases is that there is required text that needs to be added to your notice. So we'll look at that now. So here is just a picture copy of what the required information sheet looks like. So you'll see it's 1 page front and back, but again, it comes in English, Spanish, and Chinese. So it would be 3 pages total that you can download from our website. And it just has general information about the CSFRA, who's covered, what protections it has, and then information about rent increases there and eviction protection. So here is a picture copy of the bank rent increase template. And I've seen people use this for the current year's AGA as well. If you just look on the top line here, you can use the 2022 information, but it is really set up if you're using banked rent increases. It has listed out the prior year's increases that you can fill out. And then down here, you'll just fill out the total increase for the year. And on the back side of the form, here circled in red, is that required text that must be in the notice. So it's all here for you. So you can just download that and use it. And it's very clear and easy to understand by the tenant. Okay, so this is the website that you can go to if you want to download any of our forms, mountainview.gov/rent-stabilization/forms. And it will take you directly to those forms. All right, perfect. So we're at another stop. If you have any questions about what's required as far as noticing goes, please type it in the Q&A. You can also raise your hand, or if you're joining us by phone, you can dial *9. All right, I do see a question here. So the question is asking, when we send the rent increase notice with the required information sheet, do we have to send all additional languages or just English? So I'll start with that question. you're at least required to send the information sheet in the language that the lease was signed. So if that was English, you can do English, or Spanish, you can do Spanish. I like to suggest that since it's one page front and back, you do send all languages to the tenant, just so that if they understand another language better, or maybe they primarily speak another language in the house, they can really understand the information that you are giving to them. I think that's just, for me, what I like to give as a tip or a best practice. I would recommend. Okay, the next question is asking, can I please upload the website for the information again? Can I please upload? And I think maybe we're talking about how we submit the noticing on the website, and I'm going to go over that in this next section. And if you have more questions about that, I will be happy to answer it at that time. Another question is asking, do we have to use the banked form? No, you don't have to use the template that we provide. We just do that as a service, since there are a couple extra things that are required with banked rent increase notices. But if you prefer, you can go on our website and look at the regulations for rent increases. And there's a section in there that will give you the required language, and you can put that in a form of your own if you desire. Okay, next question, asking, when we upload notices to the city, do we have to upload all the attachments with it, or just the rent increase notice? This is a great question. Definitely you want to upload all of the pages of the document that you served on your tenant. So if that is the banked rent increase form front and back, and then the information sheet, you just want to scan all of it in, upload it all together as one document. And that's what you want to submit online to the city. Or you can upload it as two separate documents. It's okay either way. You can upload more than one attachment when you're on the website. But yeah, definitely give us everything you serve to the tenant. All right, any other questions about that? Those were great questions. Okay, perfect. So yeah, let's talk a little bit now about our online registration database. So as I think most of us know, the registration of your property is mandatory. So you have to do it once a year. Once you have entered in all your unit information and sort of done the initial upload, the rest of it is just really maintenance, but you do have to go on every year, January 1, and update any information that might be out of date and resubmit your registration. So we want to do that annually. This is also a place where you can file your exemptions, which is also annually. So if you are the owner and you're occupying one of your units, you want to be sure to file for an exemption. Or if you have an immediate family member who is occupying one of your units, you can file for an exemption on that unit as well. The other thing to keep in mind when we're talking about mandatory registration is that there are certain pieces of information that need to be updated within 30 days of them happening. So anytime there's a new tenancy starting, you need to update that information. If a tenant is terminated, or if there's a change in any ownership or management contact information, all that needs to be updated within 30 days. I personally also suggest if there are any other updates that need to be made, you can do them as they happen, especially for our larger properties. That way you don't have to do a mass change at the end of the year, but whatever works best for you, you can go ahead and do that. So while we're here today talking about our required notices, you do have to file your banked rent increase notices to the city. And the best way to do that is by doing that online on this registration portal. And I'll quickly mention as a side note, the other types of notices that you must upload: termination notices, which include our 3-day notices to pay rent or quit. We're also uploading termination notice follow-ups. So that's when you have UD paperwork, unlawful detainer court paperwork that you've served to a tenant. You want to upload that. And you also want to go on the website and click on termination notice follow-up in the case where a tenant received a termination notice and they just moved out on their own. You will need to notify the city that that tenant vacated as a result of that termination notice that was served to them. Right, and finally, the other type of notice that you must upload is any tenant buyout agreement that you might have reached with your tenant. You need to upload a copy of that to the city as well. All right, so this is just a screenshot of what the registration portal looks like. So I'll have a picture of your property there, and then down around here has all your unit information. And you click on the 3 dots next to the unit you want to submit for, and you'll see here we can submit our banked rent increase notice. So it'll be that option there at the top. Right, so you can submit your notices. And like I said before, you can manage your properties, update your contact information, and apply for your exemptions all in the same spot. So once you're there and you click on a unit and you want to upload a banked rent increase notice, this little pop-up screen here will pop up. I did not get the most up-to-date screenshot, but it looks the same with the current years. All right, so you'll type in some of the tenant's information, their name, and the reason, sorry, not the reason, but the date that they're getting the rent increase. And then you'll type in on the side which rent increases that you are going to apply to the tenant. And I want to be very clear that with this type of submission online, it's only for banked rent increases. So if you're only giving the current year's rent increase, you don't have to submit a copy and do this online part. This is only when you're doing banked rent increases. So previous year's AGAs or petition amount increase on top of the current year. So I just want to be clear about that. So be sure to do this within 7 days of serving the notice to the tenant. All right, I think we do have some questions here. Before I jump into them, be sure to type them in the Q&A or raise your hand. You can also type them in the chat, or if you're joining us by phone, dial *9. Oh, perfect. Yeah, so there was a question here asking if they need to file copies of just the regular AGA rent increases. And even though I just answered it, I think it's super important just to say it one more time. No, you only need to upload when you have a banked rent increase or rent increase over the current AGA. That's a good question. Okay, next question. When we serve the notice, do we still have to mail a complete copy of notice and attachment? I'm not sure I'm entirely understanding. When you serve the notice to the tenant, do you need to mail the city a copy? You don't need to mail it to us if that's the question. The preferred method is for you to upload it on the website and just scan it in and upload it that way. If that wasn't the question, you can either raise your hand or when you serve the notice, do you need to mail a complete copy of the notice and the attachment to the tenant? You would want to serve the tenant with a copy of the rent increase form as well as the required information sheet. Yes. Okay, I think I have another question here. Okay, question is asking, if a banked rent increase above the AGA is issued and the tenant successfully appeals for a hardship exemption, does the rent increase revert to the AGA automatically for the effective dates, or does the rent increase need to be reissued at the AGA amount? So, and Anki, you can jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I understand is that the tenant cannot actually file a hardship petition on the current AGA amount. So the only part of the rent increase that the tenant is actually petitioning is the amount above the AGA, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
So
you are correct. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So the current AGA would not be something that the tenant is petitioning against. Also, good question. Perfect. All right, great. All right, another one here. What the previous person was asking, is it required to post and mail rent increase documents? I think what, for rent increases, what the recommended way to do it would be in the mail, and you can also post it to the door, or is only posting sufficient? And Anki, you can also jump in there.
So those requirements are the California state requirements. So I think it's called mail and nail. So you post it and you send it in the mail.
All right, do I see anybody else? Let me check hands. I don't see any other questions. So we'll jump into our final section here and just go over where you can find some of our resources. So the first place that you can always start is on our website. The quick way to type that in is mountainview.gov/rent stabilization. And it will bring you here to our website. We have tabs on the side with some of our popular topics, so you can find what you need if you're a tenant or a landlord, if you want to download the forms, or if you're interested in looking at the most current regulations that are passed and updated with the rent stabilization program. You can go all check that out on our website. We update it very frequently, so it usually does have the most up-to-date information on it within, a week or two of that event happening. All right, the next website that you can check out that has a lot of really good information is mountainview.gov/COVID-19 housing relief. And as you'll see here, we have different sections. We have a section about our Housing and Eviction Help Center, which I'll talk about in just a second. You can also get information on our mediation program, information on temporary rent reductions, affordable housing, and eviction protections and things like that. Again, we have our website for registration. So if you haven't registered your property yet, or you have questions about it, I can help you with those. And you can get started on the website at mvrent.mountainview.gov. You can do all your unit and contact information updating and all of the uploading of your required notices. Okay, so now let's chat just a bit about our Housing and Eviction Help Center. So this is our in-person help center that we hold every first and third Thursday of every month from 1 to 5 o'clock. And we have this at the Mountain View Public Library. So that's at 585 Franklin Street. We're on the first floor in the program room. So right when you walk in the main front doors, you go off to the right past the elevator and you can find us in there. If you're not able to make it in person, you can also join us virtually. So you can go to mountainview.gov/housing help clinics, and we can do a one-on-one Zoom, and we can talk about any issues you're having at your property, or if you're having an issue uploading a notice, or if you're thinking about serving a termination notice, we can walk through all of those different types of things together. All right, so here is our general contact information for our rental housing helpline. You can call us on the phone at 650-903-6136. You can always send us an email at mvrent@mountainview.gov. And again, our website is there as well. We also have someone available who speaks Spanish. So you can also refer your tenants to us if they need any sort of help finding rent assistance or just having general questions. You can send them to us as well. And we can help them in English or Spanish or any other language. Okay, so now let's look at some upcoming webinars and clinics. So our webinar next month is August 16, again at 3 o'clock. This is going to be an interactive workshop. So we're going to be on Zoom and sort of walking through how we file rent increase petitions. So we'll show you the forms, we'll show you where you can find the information about what documents you need to upload. So that should be a lot of good information there if you think you're interested in filing a petition for an upward adjustment of rent. And the other thing I want to mention, of course, is our office hours. So we have office hours every single Tuesday. They are currently all on Zoom. So if you want to join us from 10 to 12 o'clock, you just go into mountainview.gov/RSP clinics. That stands for Rent Stabilization Program clinics. And you can join us on Zoom there. Again, get one-on-one help. If you're one of those people who likes better to be in person and you can't make those hours, just get a hold of us and we'll schedule something one-on-one at the office. All right, so we have here our legal resources that you can reach out to if you're finding yourself in need of some legal advice. So you can contact, of course, the Santa Clara County Bar Association Lawyer Referral Service or the Superior Court Self-Help Center. And I believe there are limited in-person hours for the Superior Court Self-Help Center. So if you wanted to go in person, you can go onto their website and see what their current hours of operation are in person. All righty. So that is the end of the webinar. So if we have any other questions, go ahead and type those in the Q&A. You can type them in the chat or raise your hand. If you're on the phone, dial *9 and we'll patch you through. All right, Mr. Zell, I will give you a call. Any other questions? So just to wrap up, as I mentioned earlier, we are going to send out an email at the end of this webinar. So either this afternoon or tomorrow, it's going to include the PowerPoint presentation. It will include a link to the recording, and it will also have a link to a survey where you can give us feedback and suggestions on the presentation you saw here. We'd really appreciate any comments that you might have that can help us tailor our information better for you all. And I'll do one round here of checking for questions. I'm not seeing any other questions about that, but again, of course, please reach out to us if you have any questions, or if you're thinking about giving a rent increase or banked rent increase this coming September, and you have some questions about it, we can help walk you through the forms. So other than that, I'll just again say thank you for joining us and taking a little bit of time out of your day. We really appreciate it, and we're glad we can connect. And we hope to talk to you all soon. Have a great rest of the day. Try to stay cool and try to stay safe. All right. Have a great one.